Hello Education 1030 students. So I hope everyone had a great spring break and we are ready to finish the semester strong. So I wanted to start, before we get into chapter 7 and 8, I kind of wanted to pull up the course calendar inside the syllabus. That way you can kind of see where we are the next couple of weeks and some of the important things I want to point out. So if you'll see here, we are still in Unit 2, and we are finishing up the last 2 chapters in Unit 2. One thing I want you to notice is that for this week, you're going to be responsible for 2 chapters. So we're going to be working in chapter 7 and 8, which means that you will have 2 assignments as well as 2 quizzes. So this is going to be a little bit of a heavier chapter. The reason that we have to put 2 together is because we need to have time for exploring the field, but also these 2 chapters kind of go together, so that's why we combine them. So if you look, chapter 7 is going to be about how do we remember and understand when we're trying to study for exams and to be able to make connections to bring this material into other courses. And then chapter 8 is going to take everything that you've learned, and now we're going to use that when we're taking tests. So they kind of go together. One thing I want you to notice is that both chapter 7 and 8 assignments and quizzes are due on March 27th, which is a Thursday. But if you scroll down a little bit here inside of the course calendar, you're going to see the very following week, which is next week, you are going to have your Unit 2 exam. So our second exam in the course, as well as submit your second video reflection for exploring the field. Now I have had I've had a few people who have submitted 2 of their video reflections from the very start, and some of them have already submitted all 3. You certainly didn't have to submit all 3, but if you've only completed 1, please make sure that you do your second video reflection, and it's due April the 3rd. So I just wanted to kind of get your mind wrapped around that so you can start focusing on watching the video and doing the reflection. After exam 2, we will start to get into our very last unit, which is Unit 3. So now that we went over the schedule, let's go ahead and jump right into our chapter 7. As I go through this, I'm also going to talk about some things I want you to look at in the textbook when you're reading the textbook chapters. That way you can kind of see what you need to focus on to help you meet your chapter objectives. So if we go to chapter 7 in the table of contents, it's going to list here all the learning resources you have, the videos I've linked there for you as part of making a deeper connection, and your quizzes. So if you look here, you still have your PowerPoint slides, which go along with the chapter and the textbook. Please do not substitute the PowerPoints for the textbook. You do need to still read chapter 7. This is just an addition to give you highlights, but it does not substitute for a book. You have the chapter 7 reading organizer. Remember, these are great study tools for you to help you with the quiz and on our upcoming Unit 2 exam. You do not submit those to Dropbox. You will email them to me once I ask for them, which will be during Unit 2 exam week. So if you look here, you have 3 videos that are going to really concentrate on how do we study, right? So if you look up here, it's telling you that we want to help you improve your memory. Have you ever read something 3 or 4 times over and you still don't understand? Well, that's because deep learning is not happening, right? We have to use techniques to be able to understand the material, but to remember and to be able to pull that out later on, right? So there's tools in chapter 7 and throughout these lessons that are going to help you be able to use those tools to be able to study for exams, and actually not just to memorize, but to pull it out later on when you need it. So the 3 videos I gave you that I feel will be helpful for you is how to study effectively for school or college, build focus and concentration, and then this one, the last one, it's like a trick for using your memory. It's through a TED Talk, which I love TED Talks, and we've had TED Talk before in this course, but I definitely recommend you watching these videos. So you'll see here, this is the one I was talking to you about. It's a trick for improving your memory. Here's the one on 5 ways to build focus. And then the 6 habits of highly successful students. How do you study effectively when you're in school or college? So those are the 3 that I feel like would. For our assignment, what are you going to be assessed on? What are we looking for you to be able to successfully complete at the end of chapter 7? So this week, you're going to have both a discussion board as well as an assignment that you will submit to Dropbox. So chapter 7 is where you're going to be completing a discussion board. I do have another video here for you. It is short, it's about 6 minutes. It's going to really talk about the strategy of work smarter, not harder, right? So study less, study smart. And it's really going to talk about breaking down when your teacher is talking in class and you have lectures, how can you get the most out of that, right? How do you study in a smart way that's not going to take as much of your time? And going back to chapter 7, when we're looking at, we want to be able to retain this information to pull it out later. And there's techniques that you can do to help you. So you're going to watch this video. And then when you get done, you're going to be answering some questions, right? So you will watch it. And then once you click next, you're going to see that it's going to take you again to the discussion board. And I want you to answer these questions, right? The first question in the prompt for discussion board is, what should an ideal study lesson or session look like? So you would write about that. Think about what you do. I want you to reflect. Remember, the more in-depth, the more you elaborate, it calls for better discussion points, right? What does your study session look like? So we want you first to think about the ideal study session, right? The first one is not telling me what you do. The first one is telling me what you should be doing, right? What does an ideal study session look like? Then you're going to go into the discussion and answer this. What does your study sessions look like? And if you don't study, you need to be honest and say that, right? And think about, if you do study, where and what time of the day. So are you one that is more focused in the morning, or do you have a very busy, you're not a morning person, so you can't function, and then you wait till late at night? Are you last minute? Where and what time of the day do you think is the best for you when you're studying? And then lastly, we're looking at distractions, because this is a big deal, and this is something for you to think about and reflect upon, is what are distractions you have to deal with, and how are you going to overcome them? And I want you to list at least 3. And then lastly, you will go ahead and respond to 2 classmates' discussion posts. And remember, a discussion is where you are actually engaging, right? You're reading what they have to say. You're making a recommendation. You're responding on that thought or elaborating on that thought, or you have a question based on what they're putting. But I agree, or I do that too, is not going to cut it, right, when we're talking about a discussion. So keep that in mind. And then lastly, you're going to take the Chapter 7 quiz. So remember, all this stuff is open. It opens on Friday, which is when the video was posted and uploaded. You also have to see that it is going to still be due on March 27th, which is a Thursday at 11:30. And that's when your discussion post also and your replies need to be completed. Now remember, you're responsible for 2 chapters this week. So we're going to go on and jump into Chapter 8. So Chapter 8 is going to take everything that you've learned in Chapter 7, and we are going to combine it. Now that we know our strategies, we know how to retain information, we know how to study smarter, right, and not take as much time, and we can actually start having promoting deep learning. Now we can take that test successfully. But what does that look like? What are some strategies that are going to help you be successful when you're preparing for tests in different types of courses? So how you study and prepare for, say, a communication speech class is going to look a lot different than how you prepare and study for a math exam, right? And we need to know the difference. And if you have test anxiety, that's something that we're going to focus on in this Chapter 8. Okay, so you have some resources. You have your PowerPoint slides. You will be reading Chapter 8 in your textbook. You have your Chapter 8 reading organizer to help you study for the quizzes and to go back and study for the Unit 2 exam. The other 2 videos I have here for you is, the first one is how to beat test anxiety, which is something if you struggle with, I encourage you to watch that video, as well as 10 tips to earn an A on your next exam, right? So how are you preparing for these tests? Now, this one here, I want you to note, it is not for a grade. So I'm going to go back and click. Bear with me, it's a little slow this morning. So, on Chapter 8, I have a section here above the videos called Test Anxiety Quiz. Now, this is not going to be a graded activity. This is actually for your own learning and information. This goes along with the Chapter 8 text. And what that does is it's going to allow you to get a deeper understanding if you do have test anxiety. So you're going to just read these statements and you're going to select yes. So there's a drop-down menu where you'll click on, you can click no or yes. If the statement applies to you, you will, now remember, select yes if it applies to you the day before an exam, hours before, or during the exam itself. Okay? Otherwise, you're going to select no. Now, when you get, if you look here, one thing I want to note on this test anxiety quiz, it's broken up into different areas. And what I mean by areas is mental, physical, emotional, and personal. So we separate those because you may have test anxiety, but where does that stem from, right? We have to go deeper into that. So is it a personal habit of why you get test anxiety because you're not prepared and you're the reason why you have anxiety about it? Is it an emotional response? Is it physical? Is it mental? So we have to really break down a little bit further instead of just saying, yes, you have it, but why and where is that stemming from, to help you with strategies so you can beat it. Okay, so that is not a graded activity. You're not going to submit anything. You're not going to share your discussions. This is for you to get a better understanding of what's going on, right? Now, you do, like I said, have another assignment. You had your Chapter 7 discussion board, and now you're going to have your Chapter 8 assignment that will be submitted to the Dropbox. So, if you click on this paper, it says test taking and success. It's a document that's going to come up. Just go ahead and download it. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. You do not need to write this out. I would just say download it and type inside of it. But whenever I say in the instructions to complete the assignment by providing complete text-based responses to the following questions, that means that you have to go back into your Chapter 8 in your textbook to find these answers, right? And that's what you're going to write about. You do not need to cite it in APA format because it's coming from our text, so there's no need to make citations. But I do want you to use the textbook when you're trying to find these answers, right? So that's why I encourage you to read Chapter 8 before you do this assignment. So I broke it up in two areas when we're talking about test taking. At this point, you should have already taken the test taking quiz to see where you stand and what area you would need to focus on. So test taking skills and then college success, because they are related. So the first one is test taking skills. Do you consider yourself to be a good test taker or a poor one? Why? Okay, now you're like, well, I don't have to look in the book for that answer, but if you read the chapter, right, you would consider those things that it talks about in the book about why you might be a poor one, right? And these are the things you can discuss about. So if you say yes, why? Look in the book. What are some strategies? What are some reasons why people are bad test takers? And these are the things that you would write about when we're talking about why. Do you experience test anxiety? We talk about the physical aspects of how it is when someone is experiencing it. These are things that you can look at in the textbook and elaborate and talk about for the second question. And then the last question is, what did you learn in this chapter that either explains your inability to relax while taking tests, or they can help you relax? So how could that improve that anxiety? And there are strategies in the book, and that's what you would write about. Now, there's more than one strategy. I obviously don't want you to pick a lot. They say that fewer is better when you're starting to create new habits for yourself. So I would pick maybe one or two and talk about them in that section. Now, the section that says college success, okay, think about your semester right now and all the courses you're taking. Out of all of them, which course or courses do you feel is most difficult for you? And I want you to write about that, okay? But tell me why you think it's difficult. And then lastly, if you're anxious about taking tests in this class or any other class, what are some positive self-messages you can use to help yourself stay focused? And there is a section in your chapter 8 that talks about this. So you can kind of refer back to that when you're answering that prompt or that question. And then once you have it completed, you'll obviously save it, and then that will be submitted to Dropbox. Now, that covers chapter 7, 8. What I did want to draw your attention to real quick is going back inside your textbook. I want to highlight some things I want you to look at for chapter 7 and chapter 8. Okay, so one of the things that I felt is kind of interesting in this textbook is starting on page 156 and 157 called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And that's saying there is an actual figure or graph on figure 7.1 on page 157. And this section talks about how your short-term memory is limited. And the forgetting curve is talking about your memory retention, right? So it's really interesting. If you look at the graph, it shows you the elapsed time of how many hours it goes before you forget the information that just came into you. Now remember, you're thinking about after 9 hours, after 8 hours, he says that we remember less than 40% of new information. So we have to do something with that new information. And this chapter 7 really gets into that. And it talks about how can we promote that deep learning, right? Connecting memory to deep learning on page 158. So I really want you to look at that. How you improve your memory starts on page 160. This goes on for quite a while. This section's quite large, 7.3 section. I really want you to really focus on 7.3 section from 160 to 164. It's going to give you a little bit of suggestions and things that might help you when you're trying to retain this information, right? Now, chapter 8, what I want you to focus on in chapter 8 is really the section, the first thing I want to start out is on page 173 where we talk about you actually get prepared for tests the very first day of class, believe it or not. And it talks about how important your syllabus is on page 173. And it walks you through an example on figure 8.1 on page 173 of a history course, right? And where you have to prepare and plan for tests on that very first day. And it talks about in the syllabus, what do you notice, right? What are you seeing that's important information for you to know about exams so you can prepare. In chapter 8, we also talk about preparing what we call an exam plan or designing an exam plan. It's really interesting because some people have never heard of this and it's helped you prepare. So you might look at page 174 to look at that. The other thing that I felt that was really important is on page 176 where it says how to prepare for different types of tests. So how would you prepare for math and science exams? What kind of strategies does it give you? How do you prepare emotionally, physically, right? What are you doing? And then it goes on to talk about the different types of questions, how you prepare depending on what type of test it is, right? Which is important. So if you turn to page 182, it's going to really talk about the different types of questions, like essay questions. And then it moves on page 184. I want you to look at that table. This table is important because if you're not good at essay questions or they kind of freak you out because it's short answer, you have to write an essay on it, which is quite a large piece of writing. But it tells you that there's key words in tasks or task words that kind of break it down on what you should be focusing on when you're doing essay questions. What is it asking you? Because if it asks you to analyze and you don't know what analyze means, you can't do that essay question, right? You're not going to be very successful. If it says discuss, what are some examples of what we mean by discuss? I feel like if you don't look at anything in chapter 8, except for the table and the section talking about taking essay questions, table 8.1, I feel like that will help you a lot. So just make sure you look at that. Alright guys, I know it was kind of a lengthy video because we are talking about 2 chapters. Remember, all of this is going to be due on Thursday. So pull up my calendar, Thursday the 20, I might have, let me look. So if you go to the chapter assignments, you will see here that it closes on the 27th. So that also is true for chapter 7. So Thursday, March 27th, you will have your chapter 8 quiz due. You will submit your chapter 8 test taking assignment that we just went over. And then in chapter 7, remember that it is also due on Thursday, March 27th. So the quiz will be closing at that time, and the discussion board closes at that time as well. I would read chapter 7 before I read chapter 8, just because it kind of prepares you, and it's very fluid in how it moves. First, we talk about how do you study smart, what are you doing to retain your memory, and those tricks, and then moves on into this test-taking strategies, which is what you need. Alright, don't forget, you also need to be working on your second video reflection. I have looked at many students' outline, so if you've not submitted your presentation outline for Exploring the Field, make sure you do that. You cannot begin putting your presentation together until I've looked at your outline and say it's okay for you to begin doing that. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I will be putting a separate video up for you explaining how you're going to be recording yourself now that some people are starting to put the presentation together. So that will probably go up next week because I know you want to be able to have time to work on that. Alright, if you need anything, feel free to reach out. Until next time, take care.